Amnesty International has released a report highlighting the state of human rights in Malaysia over the past year. Executive Director of Amnesty International Malaysia, Katrina Jorene Maliamauv, shares the key human rights concerns that persist in 2023.
Firstly, the right to freedom of expression and assembly in Malaysia, it has to be defended fervently. In 2023, we saw crackdowns on free speech, we saw book bans, raids on bookshops, investigations into filmmakers, organizers and participants of protests, including the Women's March and Labour Day rallies, being hauled into questioning by the police. The government used the Printing Presses and Publications Act that's being used to censor our expression. The government is still wielding the Sedition Act over us, and the Communication and Multimedia Act is also being used to censor expression on the internet. We also are urging across several themes, really urging the government to fulfill its obligation to foster a torture-free society, and torture in sort of the expansive way in which we see it either being manifested, or if we don't have the infrastructure to protect us, enabled. So, for example, we should not be comfortable with the weak IPCC, the Oversight Commission for the Police that came into force despite so much criticism by civil society, because it didn't have the independence and investigative powers that are needed. We also need an end to the xenophobic, racist and classist policies against migrants and refugees. We saw and we documented in the report how this also prevents migrant workers from seeking redress and justice. And so the one example given was the migrant workers who were arrested as they were marching to the police station because they were in a state of limbo and suffering all those rights violations. And yet we saw the Immigration Act being used against them. We need an end to the system of indefinite immigration detention and arbitrary detention that is being imposed, and to stop detaining children. Last year, we learned 1,400 children are being detained. Detention is harmful, and detention of children traumatizes them. And we also need to stop deporting people back to countries where their lives are at risk.
The government needs to realize some of the reforms they have promised to improve the state of human rights in Malaysia, says Katrina. She urges the government to better engage with civil society and rights groups who are more than willing to work with the government and assist with reforms.
There were things that the government had said that they were going to do. So, for example, repeal the repressive laws that they committed to doing. They said that they, in the past, they will review and repeal the Sedition Act, the Printing Presses and Publications Act, Section 233 of the Communications and Multimedia Act. These are all things over the years in different manifestations that they've said they're going to commit to. Fulfill those commitments. Instead, what we're hearing them say is, well, we still need this, in order to maintain public order. I don't think public order is maintained through censorship. I think all of the actions around the detention and immigration detention, the solutions are there for alternatives to detention. The civil society actors for over a decade now have been proposing these solutions, certainly for the ending of the detention of children. And although the government was very happy with the plan that they had in place to release, I think, 80 children and their guardians, there isn't a human rights-centered plan for the release of these children. And so what ends up happening then, it's potentially indefinite detention in maybe a quote-unquote better conditions, but it's still deprivation of liberty. I think that, across the spectrum, for all of the issues that I mentioned, civil society actors, rights groups, victims groups have really said that they are willing to work very closely with the government. For the death penalty, it is also a question of political will.